Hello, everybody. I'm Jay Strack, and welcome back to There's Always a Way podcast. And it's our our second international broadcast. Sean is in California, so we've already had John Lennox from Oxford, and now we're going to the other side of the world, to another country, California. But Sean Mcdowell, thanks for being with us, and can't wait to hear us talk about the subject today.
Well, super honored to be here. Big fan of everything you do, and I've been looking forward to the conversation for a while.
Well, thank you, Sean. And by the way, thank you for getting on America's time finally. It's just hard, but it worked out well, and I appreciate your cooperation.
Yeah.
Sean Mcdowell has written, and this is hard for me to say, written and co-authored some 20 books. And I remember when the first one came out. I remember when there were 2 or 3, and I was blown away by them. And Sean, let me just simply say, I do not know a better communicator and a better apologist. You put those two together, it's remarkable. I love what you do. I love the way you do it. It's crazy. It's over the top. It's insane. And when you're with young people, you make the Word of God come alive. And then when you start giving them the facts, you've already got them with you. So it's a unique combination. I loved your dad. Your dad made a great impact on my life and on a generation. I loved how what a family y'all had, and how respectful you were, and how you honored your father. And then you did some projects together, and that made it interesting when your tape began to go on a couple books that were kind of considered classics out here.
Right.
But Sean, you've earned the right, PhD, professor. You still teach a Bible class to high school students. What haven't you done? And yet you're such a young man. So as an old dude, still incredibly cool, but as an old dude, I just want you to know, I'm a big Sean McDowell fan. I love what you do with biblical worldview for this generation. And I love the fact that you care enough to make sure you communicate it effectively with whatever audience you're with.
Well, that is super kind. That means a ton. I guess I would say my heart is, I studied communications as an undergrad, and very simply put, communications is about the medium and the message. The message is the content. The medium is the way you communicate it. And I think as apologists, there's a lot of people with good content, but they don't do it with love and kindness towards others. And I fall short all the time, but that's my heart. And I think young people really respond. And you know this, speaking to young people at SLU, that if you're funny and you make it interesting and tell stories, but you really care, students come alive.
Big time. Well, one of my favorite things on the planet, and then we'll jump right into an exciting new work you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about and researching, and it just seems to ooze out on every page. But one of my favorite things that we do is when you and I are in the National Press Club, and there's approximately 500 teenagers crammed in there. We've had a meal, and we allow them to have an open mic, anything goes, and we do our best to answer every question. And when we first started, most folks were saying, well, should we get a couple teenagers and get them kind of prime the pump and have a couple go ahead and lead the way, so maybe a few others would ask. And I'm not talking about when you and I were doing it, but way back when we first started that.
Yeah.
But as you know, we don't even get to 2/3 of all the questions.
Yeah.
We leave people standing at every microphone, and that's after a couple hours. So I love being there when you're there. I love being able to graciously let you go first on some of the sticky wickets, as the British would say. So I'm just that way. I'm an older leader, but yet very gracious to the young man. Let him go first some, I like it when you kind of make an opening, and then I can try to run through it and spike the ball, But so, ladies and gentlemen, no, right now you're going to need a pen, pencil, lipstick, mascara. You're going to want to take some notes. We're going to be talking about, um, so that the next generation may know. And I believe that's your latest book, Sean. When I saw that, I went, that's one I want to, then I realized it was your latest, but I hadn't seen it. But so the next generation would know, preparing young Christians for a changing world. So before we start, Sean, I have to ask you the question I ask everybody. When you first hear the saying, or you read in print, there's always a way, what's the first thing that leaps to mind?
Somebody who you and I both know and love, which is my dad. I don't know anybody who's faced more challenges in life, but come out saying, I'm going to find a way. I'm not going to be defeated. I'm going to keep going. And, you know, my dad's story of a father who was a town drunk, sister took her own life. My dad was severely abused for 7 years, living on the farm. And that would have broken a lot of people, understandably so. And I think through God's power and people in his life, he was able to work through it. And he set out to disprove Christianity, was surprised that it's true. And no matter what challenges I've seen him face in life, relational challenges, economic challenges, spiritual challenges, he always has this sense that, you know what, if I trust God, we're going to find a way. And he just built that into me. I feel that way in my relationships, in my marriage. Hey, if my wife have disagreements, there's a way. We're going to find a way. Professionally, there's going to be a way. So when this whole quarantine thing hit, my dad's like, all right, I can't travel. I'm going to reach more people than I did before. And he has. So I think just an example of somebody who's lived that out with consistency is what instantly comes to my mind.
Wow. Well, that's a great gift, as you know, Sean. Your dad and I were always on the program, not always, but many, many, many times together. And so between our two stories, I went, 6 broken homes, 6 foster homes, and,
Wow.
and all the nonsense. And I always used to get your dad because he'd be sharing part of his story, and I'd go, "You had a dad?" So
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of truth to what you say. It's in his DNA that there's always a way. Well, Sean, speaking of there's always a way, one of the great questions, one of the great burdens, one of the great things we wrestle with is this next generation. And not so much out of concern, but just about them, but about the world in which they're inheriting from us, number one. And number two, because they're our most cherished possessions. The future, the next generation, this young generation, they're the future of the kingdom of God and the future of our country. And not only that, but as our sons and daughters and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, they're our most cherished possessions. So I really think you've struck a nerve so that the next generation will know. And I love the fact that you're not just saying, hey, let's spoon feed them a couple pablum-like answers. Let's prepare them for what is to come. Let's talk about what led to the book.
Yeah, so a few things led to the book. The big motivation was that I have 3 kids, Scotty, Shauna, and Jane, and they're all part of this next generation. And part of it was selfish, like, gosh, if I could take the time to research and think through how this generation thinks and how to better disciple and equip them, I'm pretty confident a lot of other people would want to have that kind of same knowledge and experience that comes out of it. So I was motivated by my own kids. My co-author's name is J. Warner Wallace, and he's an atheist. He was an atheist until he was 35, cold case detective. And he set out he was invited to church with his family. And then he thought, you know what, I'm going to consider this gospel message. And he took his forensic science analysis to the Gospel of Mark and ended up concluding this is reliable testimony. Well, he's spoken with students. He's written for students. He was a youth pastor for years, but brings this fresh, unique kind of training focus to students from outside the church. And I thought, given our 2 stories and 2 experiences, he's a generation, he's a boomer, I'm an Xer, this might be a really interesting, helpful guide for parents. So we sat down, we brainstormed this thing. He came up with the title, And the theme of it is really every chapter starts with love. So love understands, love equips, love trains, because we're trying to teach truth, the content or the message, but within the medium of love and relationships.
Fascinating approach, I must tell you. When I first saw some of the titles of the chapters, I'm going, was this a book on dating or love? And then I realized, man, that you're using the greatest, most powerful force and then showing how real that love is. One of the things that came to mind that I just wrote in my notes when I was reviewing the book and thinking about this interview is, and I'm interested in your perspective, we're talking about preparing the younger children for the next generation. But Sean, as a young man, you came into the world and then you had a taste at a much younger age that, hey, there's something to this thing called Jesus. But how has the world changed in a few general ways since you were a young man?
That's a great question. I think one of the big ways that has changed with this generation is the availability of information. I think this has changed everything. Relationship has changed how they process truth. So if I want a toy when I was a kid, I'd go to the Sears Roebuck calendar and I would order a toy and there'd be 3 or 4 options and it'd take 4 to 6 weeks for it to arrive. Now this generation can get on Amazon and have what they want, where they want it, how they want it, when they want it. And if they really want it on a drone, delivered that afternoon to them. So I'm not sure that we've thought through how much this availability of just products and music shapes the way that they think. And to me, it's no coincidence that in 2016, the word of the year was post-truth. Because truth implies that there's a reality outside of us that we conform our lives to. But this generation is told, you can have anything you want, anyhow you want it, anywhere. All that matters are your feelings. So there's no truth to conform their lives to. Rather, because of the availability of so much products and information, they're trained to think they can conform reality to their own lives. It actually teaches them. So that, this digital smartphone generation, that difference is at the heart of how this generation thinks and believes and approaches the world, including spiritual things. And I think this availability of information and this smartphone world, which has only been exacerbated by all the quarantine and the COVID and these changes, it affects them relationally. And I would argue it also affects their worldview. So in the book, So the Next Generation Will Know, we did all this research and came up with about 12 key characteristics of this generation, but they're really all filtered through the fact that they're digital natives. And this smartphone is how they see and understand the world.
Yeah, there's an unfettered access.
That's right.
I ought to be able to go where I want, see what I want, do what I want. And oh yeah, I may sometimes even leave the house, leave the couch. And I mean, because they have access to anything and everything. One of the things that really not shocked me, but hearing, maybe it's because I have such respect for you, hearing you make the statement and deal with why Generation Z is leaving the church and in essence leaving the faith. And I want to hear from you, and then I'll tell you a project Bill Bright and I did way back at the end of the 80s to try to answer the question, what happens to young people when they leave home, leave that Christian school, or leave their youth group? What happens when they go off to college, get married, go to the military? And that led to a lot of the things I've spent the last 25 years doing.
Wow.
To hear you and put it in print just as another wake-up call for me, and I think for the rest of the body, that we better get serious, because this generation is making a lot of decisions, and not all of them are going to bounce the way we want them to bounce.
Well, I'm interested in hearing about this project back in the 80s, but what we
back
wrote,
in the day?
And that was the 19 or 18, just kidding, couldn't resist. I knew you could take it like my dad takes it when I dish that out to him.
Payback's coming. You know that from your dad as well.
Exactly. I think we have to be careful with the statistics, because there's a lot less of this generation defining themselves spiritually than in the past. In fact, this generation is less likely to define themselves by family, as opposed to, in the eyes of many, even their sexual identities are becoming a key way that they identify themselves. So just because previous generations define themselves more with a spiritual identity doesn't mean they were really followers of Jesus. I think it was just more culturally accepted for a lot of people. So I'm not sure we're seeing as massive of a drove totally leaving the faith as certain kind of statistics might indicate. I do think there's a lot of kids in the church who say they believe, go through the motions, but don't really believe in the first place. And so when they get out and there's no longer the environment around them, they just conform to the world in which we live. So I think when you look at the stats, when it comes to the conservative church, you're seeing a lot of people no longer in the middle who just define themselves as believers, but really weren't. I think our culture is clarifying to the extreme of, if you're not a believer, don't pretend to be, to those who say they're believers really hold core ideas. I think we're seeing that take place. But for those kids who do leave the faith and disengage, and there certainly are many who do, at its heart, I think it's a worldview issue. I think it's a lack of us teaching this generation how to navigate reality from a Christian perspective. That's what I think we don't teach them how to do within relationships. So they get these challenges, they get these ideas coming from elsewhere. They're not prepared to deal with it emotionally, not prepared to deal with it spiritually, not prepared to deal with it intellectually. And so they just slowly fade away from the faith. So ultimately, it's a failure of us really equipping and teaching this generation how to think Christianly and how to navigate the world from within that perspective.
That's a very interesting take, and a little more hopeful, by the way. I've long said this generation is a jump ball. Whoever wants it can get it. I hope you appreciate that basketball analogy. I know you love basketball, but I do think this generation is still a jump ball. Whoever will pay the price and wants it the most and will earn the right to be heard, we can get it.
That's right.
Well, Sean, the project back in the day was Dr. Bright and I began to ask the question, what would happen? Where are they going? Is it good, bad, or ugly? We didn't really, the Clint Eastwood version of research, if you would. But we didn't just want to hear from one or two denominations. We wanted to make it across the body. So our goal was 40 denominations and movements.
Wow. 40
denominations and movements. And then secondly, I knew that unfortunately in the body, one of our weaknesses is that we had to give people an opportunity to reveal their own findings about their denominations, but let them do it in a way where it's not going to be fodder for someone else. It's not going to be somebody being able to pick up a club.
Interesting.
So we came up with the analogy when we finally met back here in Orlando. I said, let's leave ego and logo at the door. Okay?
In that order.
In that order. Yes. Thank you very much. And we had a much bigger box for ego than we did logo. But secondly, that we asked everybody to give their results. And I loved it when you were describing the co-author of this book about his forensic background. But we asked each one of these denominations to pick the 2 or 3 young men or women, whoever it may be, that were the most committed and devoted to reaching and keeping a young generation, reaching and keeping the next generation back in the late 80s. And so we asked them to spend 1 year, bring us your findings, but when you come in, we're going to have you write it on a blank sheet of paper, no signing, no reference to who the denomination is. and everybody used the same kind of pencil, and then fold that sheet of paper or two, whatever they needed, and put it in, this container. And
Okay.
so it gave everybody a chance, because you know how it is. The Baptists, well, the Charismatics are those that are predestined. Those Calvinists, you got to watch them. Or the Charismatic, you know how we do in the body.
I
And
do.
so the only way to get to the heart of the matter was, man, let's just lay this before the Lord. Now, by the way, we didn't, and I've known George Barna forever, big Barna fan, but we didn't do a Barna research project or the McNally research firm, or, we didn't go have a seminary, do all the research and the paper trail, etc. And so later on, by the way, the results of that was that 85 to 88%, when they left the youth group, left home, left church, were leaving, not the faith. They didn't go on the war path. Okay. They weren't angry. They weren't burning Bibles or whatever, but sure. It just was no longer everything. It was no longer the thing. Wow. It was not even, maybe even in the top two, once they got off. So we realized, we do have our students, and we send them off, and we try to give them the best education. My daughter went to Harvard, so we're excited about that. But there's a war on their faith. And we have Dr. Wine and Cheese waddle out and, smoking a pipe. And we're not real sure what's in the pipe, yep. And literally try to do surgery on their faith or pull up everything by the roots. So we know that does exist, but there's far more than that. And back then, sure. We throwing around the word culture. It didn't have near the impact and meaning it does today, by the way.
Sure.
That term. But so 85 to 88%, after they were on their own for about 3 or 4 years, away from that support group, were really beginning to lose their bearings. And so we asked, and so when this began to be criticized by some of the seminaries because we didn't have the paper research, gotcha. And I graciously, lovingly, with humility said, dudes, I'll take any day our research, because here's the reason why. Sometimes it was hard to read everything that was written by that pencil because there were tear stains on that. I mean, these were denominations who had spent a year and had come to the conclusion, we're failing. And the only bright spot was that there was a few percentage points. Some of us do a couple things better sure, than sure. Others, and some of us have more means and wherewithal to have certain programs. Let's be fair about that. But so that really kind of led me on the journey. So when I saw this study and saw what you were doing and knowing you were going to unpack that research, that's why I encourage everyone who cares about their own students or their Christian school students or your high school students or college. I just hope everyone who cares about the next generation will read this book.
Well, one of the distinctions you made that's very important is in the book, we actually, because my co-author is a detective, he traced down every single article we could find on why kids are leaving the church and what the research shows. I mean, dozens and dozens of articles. And oftentimes what happens is because they ask questions differently, they ask different groups, they have different methodologies, you get a pretty big range of what the studies show. And I think that's important to keep in mind. But we say, we've all talked about these kids leaving the faith, but you have to be careful the way you worded it. They're not all leaving the faith. Many are leaving and disengaging the church. Those are different things. So some are disengaging their faith. A good chunk are disengaging the church. How many are going to come back when they get older? And in the past, that time was when you get married or when you have kids, more in particular, then you start thinking, I want my kids to have morals, let's bring them to church. But the problem is less people are getting married. And those who get married are getting married later. And those who are getting married are less likely to have kids. And there's more of a negative perception of the church than there was in previous generations. So there's a genuine question that we're starting to really see with Gen Zers and millennials, or really more so with millennials, not as many coming back to the church as had with previous generations. So we need to rethink some of our categories. And like you guys try to do, get to the heart of what's really going on and address it.
Wow. Well, Sean, of course, when you preface each one of these chapters with love understands and love relates and love equips, I know one of the reasons that I think so many young people kind of distance themselves from the church is that they know among their peers and their group that the church may have taken a stand that has come across very harsh or very judgmental. Yeah. And so if they begin to identify a lot with that church, then all of a sudden they're afraid they're going to be in the splash zone, like when you go to SeaWorld, But I think the time has come for us to answer the questions. I love one of my favorite verses, John 1:14, Jesus was full of grace and truth.
Amen.
And Jesus always gave them the truth. He wasn't always kind in the sense, but he was always caring. Yeah. And there's a difference, as I know you know. One of the things you do and you talk about, so I'm going to ask you to unpack it, but how does love relate? How do we begin to unpack these truths and really begin to connect with the hearts of these young people we say we care about?
Yeah, so we do all this extensive research on Gen Z. I read every book, every study I could possibly find. We have a chapter early on, Understanding Gen Z. Right. But I think perhaps one of the most important insights we make in the book, and I've made this when I've spoken at Youth Pastor Summit a number of times, and you can see on people's faces, like, that's kind of obvious, but that's really important, is I'll say to people, I say, even with all this research on Gen Z, you and I, whatever generation you're from, have far more in common with this generation than we do differences. We have far more in common than we do differences. We have a common need for relationship, a common need for purpose, a common need to belong, a common need for truth. So as much as we talk about the generational differences, let that not blind us so we look at this generation and say they're the other in different music and dress. I can't understand them. That's false. We have so much in common with this generation. So when I tell people that, there's this sense of like, okay, I can do this. So then the question just becomes, how do you really build a relationship with anybody, and in particular with Gen Z? And I think when we ask it that way, it's not that hard versus building a relationship with anybody. Now in the chapter, we walk through 10 practical things that you can do, such as being a good listener, going onto their turf. One simple thing that I found is oftentimes older generations are intimidated with technology. I'll say, you want to build a relationship with a student? Just ask a student, say, hey, I can't figure out how TikTok works. Would you show me how it works? And the students, if they use it, which many do, they're going to come alive because they're the teacher. They get to inform you. You learn something, you're listening, and you're building a relationship. Hey, I'm trying to do this on my computer. I don't have a clue how to do it. And there are so many young people who would be happy to inform Dr. J. Strack, inform me, inform their parent or an adult. Sure. That's just a simple way to build a relationship with a young person. Another thing that I found that breaks relationships with this generation, kind of the opposite of your question, is since this generation is so technologically driven and they see the world through technology, is what breaks relationships is not having good, clear boundaries with technology. Not having good, clear boundaries with technology. So as we document in the book, there was a study out of Britain and the US where over 50% of students said they actually want adults to have reasonable, fair boundaries with technology. Now, of course, the key is reasonable, and we might differ over that. Right. But in my classroom, and I actually right now, I have grad students, college, and undergrads. I tell my students when we weren't just doing this Zoom thing, I'll say, I don't want any digital technology. You're going to write with pencil and paper because I want to see your faces and I want to relate to you. I don't want anything between us. And I've had no issues when I explain why to them and give them the standards. With my kids, when they first got a smartphone, only my oldest does. We're not going to have smartphones at the dinner table. We're not going to have smartphones in bedrooms. When we jump in the car, we don't just look at our phone, we talk. Now my kids fight this, and sometimes more inconsistent than other times. I don't perfectly have this down.
Sure.
But when we give clear boundaries and we hold kids accountable to it, I found that they will come alive and relate to us. And the third thing we talk about in the world is just go in the book, go where kids are at, enter their world. It's obvious. This is true in the 80s when you were talking about. Go to kids' sports games, go to their plays, find out what's important to them and spend time doing it with them. If your kid loves video games, whether you like it or not, assuming it's not a terrible video game, play video games with them. Find what's important to your kids and just do it with them. And that's how you build a relationship.
Wow. Well, again, communication. We talk about the power of communication, the importance of communication, but a basic word study. Same word where we get our word communion. Same word where we get our word communicate, obviously to communicate with one another. And the same Greek word where we get the word fellowship. It's koinonia. And fellowship is two fellows in the same ship. And so, the word, koinonia is, it means to have in common, to share with, and to partake with. And, obviously a picture of having a meal and breaking off the loaf of bread. You take a piece, I'll take a piece. There's an assignment or there's a difficult situation. Man, let me help you with that. How can we, so true communication is what you're talking about. We're trying to get in the same boat, and we're gonna be able to talk to one another, and we do it by and so communion, it means we listen, we got to be still, we got to not just lecture. So when I understand the word, it helps me to realize that you have to earn the right to have communication. We have a young man lives across the street. He's quite an athlete. He's in the driveway practicing basketball, practicing lacrosse, running in the neighborhood. I mean, he's just an alpha. And he was 12 years of age, and their basket broke. So he came over, and I have a basket, in my driveway. And he said, man, would you mind if I shot some baskets once in a while? I said, well, you got to prove to me you're worthy to be on this court. So, let me see your game. Well, after a few minutes of being properly introduced to him, I realized he had more than enough game to play on my court any day. He was very good, but we began just a banner back and forth. And so I'd shoot some horse with him, or, we'd do a little one-on-one till I ran out of gas. And then I never will forget, I said to him one day when I found out he kind of liked professional basketball, I said, go ask your dad or mom, whoever's home, say the guy across the street has quite a game room with about 40 or 50 jerseys. Signed jerseys and helmets and all. And I said, now you never go, I don't want to be the old guy inviting some young guy to come into my house.
Right.
So you go check with your folks, make sure you tell them where you're going and make sure it's all right with them, and just have her wave at me out here in the driveway or give me thumbs up or something, And I said, I won't have my feelings hurt, because I wouldn't want because we didn't know each other very well.
Sure.
I said, don't worry about it, won't hurt my feelings if they're concerned. In fact, I don't blame them for, so I went through all that.
Of course,
and we came up, I showed him the game room. He freaked out, absolutely freaked out. And then I have a bunch of stand-up arcade video games from back in the well, pool table, all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, about a year later, I ended up getting one of his jerseys and asked him to sign it from the junior high team he was on.
Cool.
And I had it up for a long time, And so when I gave him a book, Joe Gibbs's book on how to become a man, from the legendary coach, and it's got a strong message in it, but he was a sports figure. So those are just some of, I think, and as you could go on for an hour with examples, but that's, I found that's always worked. And when you have things in common, then you can communicate. And you got to earn the right to go, hey, man, have you ever, and he read the book, told me about the book, what he understood, he asked me questions about what he didn't understand. And he goes, well, man, that being a Christian thing's a big deal. So it entered a whole new conversation. So It's exciting, it's fun, it's time consuming, but it's what we're here to do. It's what it's all about.
And the principle you hit on is simply this. If we sat down and I said, Jay, I'm curious, define leadership for me. Who's the most influential leader you've ever met? How have your views of leadership changed? Like, you would come alive because that's what you think about. That's what you love. Well, just look at a kid. What do they love? What's important to them? How do they spend their time? And just enter into their world and make it important. That tells somebody that they matter. It tells them they matter. So that's the principle that we want to communicate in the book to people, is just find what's important to kids, and whether it's important to you or not, make it important, and you can build that relationship. Now, sometimes it takes time. Sometimes kids have harder walls than others, and they're at different stages in their life. So not every kid is going to respond the way we want them to, but it doesn't mean you're not having an impact. And it doesn't mean you can't make steps. And it doesn't mean many students won't respond positively when we reach out in that fashion.
Sean, one of the great strengths I think you have is your grasp and the understanding, I get timing, understanding, but you have a grasp of the movies that are out there. You have a real grasp on what the 3 or 4 hot buttons are, for the age group that you're talking to, so one of the things I wanted you, and I noticed you have a whole chapter on preparing students through movies, music, social media, current events.
Yeah.
Give us a couple practical examples for those that are serious about reaching students.
I would be happy to. And I always felt like my parents did this well, that I would look at what movies are popular, look what music they're listening to. And sometimes I'll say to my kids, turn that music off. I can't take it for different reasons. Sometimes the parents have to do that. But oftentimes I'll go, hey, tell me why you like that song. What is it about? What do you think it's saying? And just try to spark up a conversation based on it. But here's a couple practical things I did with my kids recently. About my son's 16, when he was 14, this movie Bohemian Rhapsody came out, which is about the rock band Queen. And he was just interested. His friends were seeing it. He goes, hey, Dad, will you take me to see it? It's PG-13. I read about it and had some sexual content just in terms of ideas, but not the images or the acts. I read it. I'm like, you know what? I think this is okay. He's ready. And we can talk about this. So I said, hey, all right, I'll take you to see this movie, and a friend whose parents approve. All I ask is when we're done, we come back and sit at the dinner table, and I just want to know what you think. What did you like about the movie? Did you ever feel the movie was preaching at you? Were there any Christian ideas in the film? Were there any anti-Christian ideas? We go to the movie, we come back, we sit down, and just had a 30-minute, not a lecture, a conversation about this film. And my son, he goes, Dad, at this point, this was in the 80s. They were preaching something you never would have heard in the 80s. And I said, that's exactly right. Good for you. In the midst of a good film, they're trying to shape the way you see the world. And we moved on. Another example, it was last summer, my daughter, who's now 13, she wanted these Birkenstock shoes, which are like $100. These are expensive shoes. And we're in Orange County, so everybody has them. Orange County, California, not Florida.
Right.
And
which is where I
yeah, exactly. I came up with this idea. I said, okay, I will buy these Birkenstocks, but here's what you need to do. You need to watch 50 of these short PragerU videos. And Dennis Prager is this Jewish talk show host. And he does these 4 or 5 minute videos. Some are political, but a lot of them are cultural. Some are theological. I said, if you just watch them, and I want you to write just a 1-paragraph summary of each one, and then talk to me or your mom or your grandparents about them. She did it. She watched 50 of these things. And she's like, Dad, did you know this about Planned Parenthood? And I'm just kind of plain dumb, like, tell me about it. So my daughter watched 50 of these, wrote summaries, we had conversations, and then I took her to go get those Birkenstocks. Another thing, I just finished a book recently, updated the whole True Love Waits campaign, and it actually comes out this fall. It's not out yet. And I intentionally made it 30 chapters. So I'll say to parents, I'll say, why don't you read 1 chapter a day with your kids and talk about it? And when they're done, get them some reward. Well, that didn't work for my son, but my daughter jumped on it. She read the whole book, gave me her feedback. We went to Starbucks, and I had a conversation with my daughter about sexuality and how far is too far, and about marriage. And we had about an hour-long conversation. And I promised her I'd buy her some shoes. And of course she goes, Dad, there's outlet down the mall, down the street. I could get 2 vans for the price of one. Is that okay? I said, good. Now you're a little capitalist too. Sure. So the whole approach in the book that Jim and I are trying to take is not to get parents to say, here's a new program you have to do, because nobody's going to do that. But if we shift our thinking a little bit, there's more opportunities that come up in daily life to engage our kids, big and small. One, to build relationship with them. Simply like if I go to the store, I used to just run to the store. Now I just grab one of my kids and go, hey, come with your dad to the store. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but that's 10 extra minutes I have with one of my kids. And also look for opportunities to engage their worldview thinking. If parents would just shift their thinking a little bit, or grandparents or youth pastors or anyone who loves this generation, there are opportunities right there in the palm of your hand if we'll just take them.
Wow. Great advice. Great advice. Life-changing adventures. We have a few minutes left, but I love that. I believe we've got to put a sweet taste in the mouth of our children for the things of God and for that which is wholesome and just fun and clean. They don't come by it naturally. I've learned, we all have a nature situation that we inherit, but I just believe there's something about those adventures together. I believe standing on a basketball court or standing on a boat fishing, or sitting on the boat after you've made your first scuba dive so you can make the second one, the residual nitrogen getting out of your system, et cetera. So on the way to things and doing fun things with my kids, we've had some of the greatest discussions, better than the ones I planned and the ones I was ready for, the ones where we had a come to Jesus moment, Yeah. And so I love that whole emphasis on life-changing adventures for students.
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is to, one, like you said, just think of fun things to do together where conversations will come up spontaneously. Driving home in the car for a basketball game. As long as kids aren't glued on their phones, you can have natural conversations that arrive in that setting that might not at, say, in a classroom or in a lecture hall. So just creating relational space for those to spontaneously arise, like you said, I think is really smart. We also intentionally plan what we hope are life-changing adventures for our kids, such as mission trips. And we got back actually the week before the quarantine, COVID craziness. We were up at Berkeley, and we had brought in UC Berkeley and the Berkeley City campus. We brought about 25 high school students up there, including my son. And we brought in a couple atheists. We brought in some interfaith chaplains. We had a lady who defined herself as a lesbian poet, professor, theologian. Those were her categories. Let her speak to our students. And we taught our students how to engage and ask good questions. It was an adventure, but it was also very eye-opening because there was a spiritual component as well. So I'd encourage, that's really what one of the last chapters in the book is. Not only let's do these great vacations that you're talking about, that is hugely important. Let's also think through some spiritual life-changing adventures and what that can look like for our kids. Those are times that also can form their thinking.
Sean, what are the 2 or 3 things that with all your heart you want to make sure that we pass on to the next generation?
Well, I guess I would say 2 things. Number one, that Christianity is true. I'm not a Christian because it makes me feel good. I'm not ultimately a Christian because my parents are Christians. I'm a Christian because I think it's true. And if our kids don't have that conviction and they come to Christ for any other reason, then when some other youth group is more fun, or when they find hypocrites in the church, or they go through suffering, they're going to bail on their faith. This generation has to know that the only good reason when it's all said and done is that Christianity is true. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 15. If it's not true, don't believe it. Don't waste your time. If it is true, it changes everything. So number one, that Christianity is true. Number 2, the concept and the reality of grace. Jay, I was speaking at a conference probably, if I remember, this past fall. And it was an apologetic conference, maybe 800 people, so decent size. And this youth pastor who was heading up contacted me, said, hey, I just want to let you know that there's a youth pastor who's coming to this conference who's just stepped down because he's walked away from his faith. He was just giving me a heads up. I said, hey, thanks for letting me know. Will you ask that youth pastor if he'd be willing to have lunch with me? And I'm not going to try to fix him, but if I can answer questions and help him, I'd love to have a conversation with him. So I rushed over, had a conversation with this guy, and he was the typical, like, outgoing, fun, like you could just see him working with students and just being in his element. Well, he asked me a ton of questions. I probably tried 45 minutes to answer. And I just didn't feel like I was helping very much. I'm like, gosh, this is my job. I don't think I'm doing very good. And at the very end, he said to me, he goes, is there anything else you'd say to me? And I honestly think this was spirit-led. I said, in my experience, I've had a lot of conversations and dialogues and even debates with former people in ministry who leave the faith and become atheists. Every single time in my experience, I find some misunderstanding about grace. And I find that this person never had a genuine encounter where they knew they were a sinner, broken, in desperate need of God's grace. Have you ever had that experience? Jay, it was like time stood still. He looked at me and goes, no, I came to Christ because I was hurting and told that Jesus would make me feel better, not because I was a sinner and I needed his grace and forgiveness. Can you imagine that, Jay? Wow. In leadership with hundreds of students, opening the Bible and teaching it day after day, and never had an experience of grace. I don't know how anybody can really experience God's grace and walk away from the faith. It is truly the most beautiful thing that sets Christianity apart, that God can save a sinner like you and he can save a sinner like me. That's the heart of the Christian faith. So we need to let this generation know Christianity is true and it answers the biggest questions. But that's head knowledge. It's when it's in their hearts and they know and experience God's grace. That's the transformative truth when it sinks home for them.
Wow, well put, well put. And thank the Lord that young man got to have that discussion, that somebody would care enough without judging him and share with him, hey man, let me tell you what I know. Let me tell you what I found. I'll close with this, Sean. I was invited to speak at the largest Palestinian university in Ramallah on the West Bank, after 9/11. That was a joyful moment for the. Wow. And so while I'm speaking, a young man just kind of stands, and he goes, "I need to ask a question." I said, "Well, don't be shy. Go ahead." Like he's already commandeered the whole deal. I said, "Go ahead, man." He said, "I want to know, are you a Christian?" And I said, no, I'm sorry. He said, "I want to know, are you an American?"
Huh.
And I said, "Well, man, yes, I was born, in America." And he said, "No, but are you an American? Do you tell people I'm an American?" I go, "Well, we have a lot of people from all over the world that are Americans. But, I was born in America." And I knew what he was getting at. But about the third time, he said, "Now, listen, are you an American or not?" I go, "Dude, look at me. It's worse than that. I'm a patriot. I believe America is the greatest nation in the history of the universe. I believe that we're the most powerful. I mean, not even the Romulans and the Klingons want to mess with us. We are all powerful. We're the greatest nation. We're the most generous nation. Now look at me. Does that mean we're always right? No. Does that mean we've maybe capable of making some mistakes? We've made hundreds, and we admit it, and we know it, and we own it. I'm here today not to lecture. I'm here today not to defend. I'm here today saying, how can we help? Because we know you're going through some. And then the second question, you know what that is? Well, are you a Christian? And I go, well, it's worse than that. So every time they ask me a question, how I felt about Israel, how I felt, whatever it was, I'd go, dude, it's worse than that. I'm not only this, I'm this. And I said, I'm not a Christian. Now I've been baptized, but I'm not a Christian just because I was baptized. I said, all over the West Bank and all over the Middle East, we got people that are Coptic, and we got people that are Catholics and Armenians and on, big and Catholics, because their granddad is that. We have a lot of people running around saying, I'm Islamic, I'm a Muslim, because your family is Muslim. And we have a lot of people across the street over here that are saying they're Jewish, but are they Jewish in their heart and in their? So we got a lot of people in America and here claiming I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim. So I said, let me be candid with you. I'm a devoted, passionate follower of Jesus. I wasn't baptized as a baby. My granddad's not a preacher. My name's not been on the church roll. I didn't even hear about Jesus until I was 17. And I built a manger in my heart. I was right down the street from Bethlehem, so that didn't hurt. But I said, like in Bethlehem on that night, I built a manger in my heart, and I asked Jesus to be born in me. And I said, the reason I'm here is because Jesus said, Jay, I like that you tell everybody you're my devoted, passionate follower. But Jay, you can't run around the Middle East and act like you're my follower and
right.
do anything to care about what the Palestinians are going through. Now I've got to care about Israel, but guess what? I've got to care about how things are in Palestine. But I love that what you were saying, because it's not just, oh, I'm a Christian. No,
right.
It's more than that, and it's real, and it's personal. And you do such an incredible job breaking that down and living that out. And I just want you to know we think the world of you at Student Leadership. You know that, our entire team. And I got to have you first on the podcast, so I'm pretty pumped.
Hey, super honored to be here. Huge fan of what you do, Jay and Brent. One of the partnerships in my life and ministry that I value most. So thanks for the opportunities you give to me. I appreciate that you say it blesses what you guys are doing, but no, it goes both ways, 100%, 100%. Anytime I can do something for you personally or the ministry, I want to do it for you. So thank you.
Well, this has been Sean Mcdowell, brand new book. I hope you'll get it. I think you realize the need for it so that the next generation may know. And we want them to be fully convinced in their own minds. And this book will give you the tools and the wherewithal. Check out Sean Mcdowell. We'll have his information on the screen any way you can. Sean, you and your family, all the best.
Thank you.